you've done a variety of things in the realm of the fitness industry. I think you've kind of came on and taken a few things by storm a little bit. I love your content that you put out. Your books become one of the things that I recommend to coaches early on. I like how you break things down in there. But as far as all the other things you've done, I'm sure you're not tenured at clown college yet, but I'm hoping that happens. Give us a little background of all the other things you've done, your credentials and that kind of thing for people.
Sure. I have a master's in strength and conditioning, a PhD in exercise physiology. I've competed as an athlete in various sports. I did jiu-jitsu and submission wrestling and mixed martial arts. I was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I competed in strongman in, between 2010 and 2014, and competed for a couple of world championships in the 175-pound class. I did a little bit of weightlifting prior to the strongman stuff. I was pretty terrible at that, but I've been involved. I got into this stuff because I like to train and compete, and I wanted to be the best athlete I possibly could. And anything I could learn to try to help myself on that front, that was why I was interested in it. I've always been a bit perplexed at people that don't like to train and that don't really like to compete. I'm like, I don't know why you're learning this stuff.
Yeah.
The point is. But yeah, I've since I've worked in the industry, like I've worked as a professor for 5 years at Brooklyn College and at Springfield College. After my stint at Springfield College, I came to New York City, and I was, going to work at a specific facility, Peak Performance, in the private sector. And then that facility just went out of business. So from there, I worked on my own. And I just started putting more of a focus on doing presentations and writing books and things like that as well. And I wrote, I've written 3 books. I've written Mass and Mass 2, and then I wrote the Coach's Guide to Optimizing Movement book. That third book is really the accompanying book that has really everything in it from the certification seminar model that I teach, Rethinking the Big Patterns. And, I'm trying to make that seminar certification model, kind of its own thing that takes up its own real estate in the fitness industry. There's a million certifications, but there's a few of them in my mind that have like a decent level of weight to them, and I'm hoping that mine can move into that category. And I think that I think the content for it is solid. And I hope that as I teach it more and it gets more exposure, people realize like, oh, this is not like a stretching certification or something like that. Like, this is the real deal. And there's nothing else quite like it. So that's kind of my goal right now. And kind of, I guess it's always hard, like you try to give these quick snapshots, and it feels kind of cheap when you try to strip away all these years and all these moments and
Yes,
things like that into these boiled down versions. But that's probably the elevator pitch version of it.
yeah, no, it can be tough because there's so many nuances that lead to how you got to where you are right now, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's one of the big crossovers I think we wanted to get out of the our podcast in general is being able to touch on all these different lanes. You bring it up definitely in your book in regards to fitness is still kind of in its infancy in a lot of ways. That's why there's so many errors being made, and why there's these dogmatic camps that kind of start to evolve. And I think that's the biggest thing. Why I think you're perfect for kind of bridging some of these gaps that we see across the field. And I think that's why it's great that you're pushing that to be a certification and a legitimized thing, because it crosses over everything, in my opinion, whether you want to be a CrossFit athlete, a power lifter, a strength coach in general. That's why I recommend that my strength coaches read it. Because it's this objective approach that applies to everything, and it's a foundational approach that applies to everything, and a lot of those things still have yet to be standardized. There's still so many variations of how people do stuff, and I think some people are deliberately trying to make themselves unique and stand out, so they start to do things like that. I get that, but it creates so much confusion for an already overly confused society. If we haven't already seen that through COVID, how confused we are, we're fragile. And that's why fitness becomes this huge thing that almost hurts people mentally than builds them up if they get into it in the wrong aspect. But trying to dig a little deeper, take me back to like 15-year-old Pat Davidson. Who were you?
Oh,
What were you doing? What was that like?
it's a really good question. I had a fairly difficult childhood, where I was raised by my grandparents up until their deaths, and then I kind of got bounced around a little bit, and I ultimately ended up with an aunt, and I lived with her, and I really found refuge in sports. They were very much, they had their own rules, and it didn't really like, I mean, my best sport was baseball. I also was pretty good at football, and it's kind of like, at least out there, there's some absolutes. It's a lot more black and white. Like, either you can go out and dominate or not, and it doesn't really matter. So I really had a lot of, I was a pretty, I would say, isolated, shy kid at that point in time, in a lot of ways, despite the fact that, like, I probably shouldn't have been, based on all like objective markers in some ways. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of like my status on sports teams, being a pretty smart person, all of those elements probably should have been ones where I would have been, very much, the kind of kid that you would expect to be going places or something like that. But I had a lot of personal problems that were the result of really some nightmarish situations that I lived through. And I think that those really like walled me off in a lot of ways, and left me at that time period someone that really struggled to actually have friends and be able to, merge into social groups and things like that. So I kind of went in a different direction. And, I basically, I grew up on Cape Cod, like further out in Cape Cod too. It's pretty rural, and the winters are pretty desolate in a lot of ways. My graduating class from high school was less than 100 people. And so I kind of like saved up money, and I built my own little home gym in the basement, and I worked out after school. I tried to learn everything I could about training. And I can remember, like, even in the winter time, I would take my backpack and I would put weights in it, and I would grab a coaxial cable for the TV, like a 25-foot one, and tie it around my waist and run loaded sprints with it behind me. And this would have been 95. You know what I mean?
I was just going to say, that's crazy stuff in 95.
Yeah. People weren't doing stuff like that,
No.
And it was just, I would do that by myself after school in the, in bad weather, whatever. So it's not that much has really changed in a lot of ways for me.
No.
But yeah, I was doing everything I possibly could to develop myself and put myself in a position where I might be able to be a professional athlete, or anything really on that front. My refuge.
Yeah. That resonates a lot with myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people, how they get into the strength side of things and the training side of things. And I rather enjoyed having those crappy circumstances, because it adds to that Rocky Balboa mentality when you're doing stuff like that as a kid. And you if you're not in a competitive environment and you're constantly just challenging yourself, I don't know, I kind of relish some of those things. That's how I first got turned on to you, was mass. A couple guys in our gym in the weight room were doing it, and it was a little bit soul sucking, and I was like, who the fuck created this thing? And that sent me down that lane, and I was like, you can tell a lot by a person by what they come up with program wise, just a ton. And it spoke volumes. So I was like, this guy trains like a savage. And that kind of led me down that rabbit hole of seeing what you put out and those kind of things. Yeah, so it's super great. Anyone that hasn't come across that, it's great. I even use it sometimes, a broken down version of it, as like my own personal GPP, just to kind of, if I've been away from a while, get myself back into things. No, it's awesome. And yeah, super challenging. So rethinking the big patterns, jumping ahead quite a bit. What stimulated you to kind of create that initially, and where'd you see where's the gap? I need to say something here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the process by which I went through to kind of get there, I sort of talk about it in the Coach's Guide book too, is, I like my training history, and for other coaches that are in their 40s, they probably have a similar kind of a journey where it's like, Mike Boyle kind of outlined the evolution of a strength coach, and it was like right on the money for me.
Mm-hmm.
My original training style would have been very much like bodybuilding stuff, because that's all there was to
Right.
learn in the 90s. Literally ESPN shows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As a teenager, there was body shaping with Dr. Pete and Big Rick and Kiana.
Yes.
And it was kind of like, I learned fitness originally through that, along with like the Sean Ray bodybuilding show. And, so yeah, man, I mean,
that's great. That's great.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's a very specific reference. If you know it, you know it.
Yeah.
So like, I can remember saving up for my first pack of Metrex, the brown Ziploc ones, and they just were, it was like trying to drink liquid porridge death. They're terrible. So I was so disappointed after I saved up for all that time, and I was like, well, I'm still drinking.
The packaging looks incredible. Yeah.
Now you get cookies and cream mixed with unicorn or something like that. And it's like delicious, and people have no idea. But I started with that in high school, and then I eventually kind of got into MMA, and at that time, my coach was friends with someone that was like very well established in the kettlebell community. And I learned kettlebell stuff through him, but then I sort of swung over into more formal education for exercise science. And I was very lucky to have the professor for the program I was in. She competed in weightlifting, and she's very well versed in training. I mean, this woman was an athlete, and so she really taught very high level stuff across the board, from dynamic warm-ups, all kinds of stretching and tissue preparation stuff, obviously weightlifting movements, plyometrics, sprinting, agility, just a very good across the, I mean, she really was somebody that trained.
Sure.
Like, in looking back at it, like she was a beast, and very, very smart, and lived it. You know what I mean? Like the real deal.
Huge.
So, and then, taking classes with her, and, people knock the NSCA textbook all the time. I'm like, that book is still good, man. I don't know. Like, you clearly didn't read the thing. I can tell from a 5-second conversation when you didn't read it. There's all kinds of good stuff in there, but just going through some of like the classic textbooks, the, NSCA book, even like, I think it's by Stone and Kramer or something like that. It's like
Sure.
got the black cover with the veiny arm on it.
Yeah.
And it's like pulling the spot up on the bench press, I think. But it's like, I think it's called Designing Resistance Training Programs.
There you go.
Another fantastic book. And I just started getting into reading as much as I could. You know, we had all of those Russian manuals that were just like photocopied from like some grimy weight
Or you
room.
got to read sideways.
I have all those.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I still got them.
Yeah, good old A.S. Medvedev and Verkhoshansky, and you know, there's funny stuff in there. Remember the multi-year development of weightlifting one, where it like talks about the restoration stuff, and it's like recommending bird watching in pine forests. I'm like, this is highly specific recommendations. This is very unusual. Something magical about Russian pine forests, apparently.
I mean, there might be. There
very well could be. It might have a very specific effect. I don't know. There's all kinds of needles out in that forest.
It's the ions that the trees are putting off. I mean, if we dove into the depths of that, it's possible. It's possible.
There's funky stuff in there. You know, I took my training in the direction of weightlifting, but I was fortunate enough. I was in Massachusetts. I met some good friends that like were coaches at Mike Boyle's place. So I always just wanted to jump in with people doing things that I was like, hey, that looks like good training. Can I jump in with you? Yeah. And so I started training with one of his coaches, and they just literally followed like that, you know, linear and lateral day approach. And so I got to train and learn that stuff. And so like in terms of like learning about like how do I get to rethinking the big patterns, it was kind of like I got exposed to all these things. And I really, when I got exposed to Boyle and I saw some of his DVDs for Functional Strength Coach and 1, 2, 3, whatever, I was like, man, this dude's really good. Like, I don't know why people knock him so hard. Like, he's really smart and logical. And he started talking about all the movement development stuff. And I was getting banged up at that point myself. I was starting to get more towards mid-20s and like just typical young kind of a person trying to do weightlifting and like shoulders starting to scream and back and knees and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, that sort of sent me down that Gray Cook angle. And then kind of like getting spun into Charlie Weingroff concepts at that time. And that leading me into DNS stuff and DNS, you know, meeting some people at a DNS conference that were talking about PRI. And going to PRI conferences. And I think I took over 20 PRI courses and getting hooked up with the guys from iFast, Bill Hartman. And, you know, just continuing to learn from people like that. Ultimately, you know, we're talking a long time. You know what I mean? Like
once you get to Bill Hartman, you know, there was a few steps that got there. I mean, that guy's a warlock of things at times.
Yeah,
100%.
So you don't go from Boyle straight to Bill Hartman. Just for people listening, like start with Pat's book and then work your way there.
Yeah, I try. You know, it's like you know, if you're gonna understand Bill, man, you've had to have done a lot of precursor work, and then you're still gonna understand 10% of what he's saying. But when you unravel that 10%, you're like, oh, that's what it means. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So it's that's a pretty good. And look, like I did a lot of my own work on my own time too. I got a tremendous amount of value from reading the Yanda Approach book as well. Like that's a fantastic book that really kind of. I also read all of Shirley Sarman's textbooks as well. So I did a lot of just reading of books that were available, any resources I could get, you know, watching video conferences like the PRI Myokin and Pelvis and the respiration one as well.
Yeah.
You know, I just lived it. I dove into all of those things and really learned those models to the best I possibly could. And eventually it's funny because the process for rethinking the big pattern specifically, you know, one of the best professional moments that I ever had was when Mike Ranfone invited me to be a co-presenter with Bill at an event that he put on that was called The Reckoning. And it's kind of like, damn, I'm presenting with Bill Hartman. Like, that's a big deal for me. And during Bill's presentation, he said, I want everybody to write out their model. No, seriously, write out your model. And I took that to heart, and I started to try to write out, what do I do on a daily basis? Like what guides me? What's the model? And legitimately, that's what turned into Rethinking the Big Patterns. And I believe that we did the Reckoning presentation 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And it has to be 5 now. It's got to be that one. And it basically took me like 3.5 years to fully write out the model. And that's about when the book got finished.
Okay.
So, the beginning of writing out the model turned into a seminar, and then the seminar felt incomplete. So I started to write out, I wrote a few articles that went on Simply Faster. And those articles kind of turned into Rethinking the Big Patterns 2 as a seminar that I started teaching. And from there, it just kept growing and evolving. And eventually, like, I remember after I wrote those articles, I learned so much from the process of writing the articles. I was kind of like, I think that writing out a PowerPoint's helpful, writing out a flow chart's helpful, but writing articles way more helpful for me to even conceptualize what I'm doing and put it together. I should continue this process. And that's really what turned into starting writing the book. And for me, writing the book was I learned more from writing the book than maybe anybody's going to get from reading the book.
Sure.
Just the exercise of doing that forced me to really organize my thoughts and put things together. And also, whenever I'm working on a project, I'm kind of like my own lawyer in my own head, cross-examining myself. So I had to really kind of make it airtight.
Sure.
And I think that's what kind of emerged from the process of trying to write the book.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I did a poor job here. We're gonna have to downshift like we're in a Formula One car.
I guess the other thing I want to mention on it too is that, it's what it sounds, it'll sound almost like I just wrote a physical therapy book after what I just said.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really not the case.
No.
Because there's also all the other information in this book is training. You know what I mean?
Right.
And because I spent years and years and years and years learning everything I possibly could about all the various modes of training, whether that be sprinting or weightlifting or, bodybuilding style training or whatever, jumping, like plyometric science. I put everything into this book. It's just that it's organized around principles that are based around human movement.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that sums it up a little bit better to put people in the right direction as far as what's going on there. Because you're breaking down, the things we find ourselves in. I know it's interesting, like kind of how you're saying your own lawyer and cross-examining yourself. I think I went through that same thing as an early coach when I was coaching sports that I didn't play. And I was like, what do I do here? There wasn't anyone to ask. So I looked at game film and I started tally marking repetitive things that I would see because I knew no better way than to just break down game film. How long, and a stopwatch, how long were they doing that part of the activity? How long, what patterns was I seeing the most frequently? And that served to kind of create a framework for that sport, at least things to touch on. And then the same thing, what movements were we seeing injuries to? Because a couple of sports I work with actually had way more injuries than any sport should have. And I'm like, something's going on there that, I don't think it's the sport itself because they were non-contact related things. But I think it's a really good way to start to break things down and look at stuff. And that's kind of what you do there. It's a very objective approach, just breaking down, human movement and what we're looking at and basic things, but they're not basic in people's minds as far as, what they're looking at. I think there's still a lot of confusion around that for, the average.
In some ways, I feel like as an outside observer and coaching a sport you've never played, you have some advantages because you don't have that bias.
Right.
It's like, this is the way it's always been done. And we're going to continue to do it that way because it's always been done that way. And it's kind of, you might come with a completely different approach altogether.
Yeah.
That's a much more objectively intelligent approach.
Mm-hmm. And I know a basketball coach thought I was a little crazy when I started throwing out like times for what they were doing in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because they break down game film totally different. They were breaking it down, to look at specific things and pick out nuances of what a guy was doing, or maybe looking at shot form or something like that. Stuff I wasn't concerned about really.
Right.
And then I started throwing stuff, and they looked at me kind of sideways, like either, I mean, it went one of two ways. Either I was crazy, or it's like maybe this guy's onto something, and maybe we should have been looking at some of this ourselves because it seemed like common sense. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it didn't. I want to downshift though a little bit. You may have already touched on it, but what was the first thing you found success in? Your childhood speaks to me a lot,
Mm.
and I know that I was having trouble organizing my life and making sense of things, and I don't want to say finding purpose, but I just didn't know how to handle a lot of stuff. I'd seen a lot of things how to do them the wrong way, but I was trying to find my right formula to do things correctly and find something that's going to be a success formula. Where did you start to first see success, and how did you start to make a formula, which I've determined, it's been successful. So how did you
Yeah,
start formulating that?
that's a really interesting question. I mean, as a younger person, I had a gift for being able to hit a ball. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
for whatever reason, I think from a very early stage, if you put a bat in my hand, I could hit a ball. You know what I mean? And that still is something. Like, I haven't swung at live pitching in a long time. I guarantee if you put a bat in my hand, it's still good. People are gonna be like, "What the hell? Seriously?" Like, it's like, yeah, I told you I could do this. Like, I'm good at this. This is something I can do. And if I didn't have that gift, I don't think I would. I don't think I'd be alive, to tell you the truth. I really needed the presence of a number of coaches who sort of took me in and like really helped me as a young man. But if I didn't have that ability to hit a ball, forget it. I don't think I would have gone by the wayside, and I don't think anybody would have given a shit. And so that probably would have been a very different outcome for me. And so I understand how difficult life can be for a lot of people. And mine, I was fortunate to have something like that kind of kept me relevant for some people that are able to, at least guide me or mentor me at some points in my life that were critical. In terms of it's funny because I always wanted to be a pro athlete. That was kind of like the thing for me. And I never particularly wanted to be the studious person. I was so lazy in high school. Like, I mean, I legitimately, when I think about like my academic skill, like it was pathetic. Like, I mean, if I could cheat on a test, I definitely would have cheated on the test. Like, I can remember stealing every like test answer key in math class in high school and just being like, all right, I don't have to do any work in math all year. Perfect. So I think I'm inherently a pretty lazy person in a lot of ways. Like, if I don't have to do something, I'm not going to do it. Doesn't make any damn sense. But that wasn't able to carry through for me in the beginning of college. Like, I really didn't go to classes in high school. I don't know how I got through and did pretty well, but I got to college and I failed out really fast because I wasn't going to class. I wasn't doing anything. And then I started again in community college. And it's funny because I actually, I was a mess at this point, but I got these like video courses, and this is VHS tapes at this time. And I remember taking like some history courses, and it was this one guy that taught them. And I can remember it was a course on the Vietnam War. And I remember being like, fuck, I don't want to watch all these videos and blah, blah, and like take these exams. But there was something about the fact that it was video and I could rewind and actually pick up everything that he was saying. And so, I mean, it's literally, I didn't have a computer at the time. I was just a notebook and writing everything down by hand. But I found like I literally transcribed the whole course by hand. And I found myself enjoying it. I don't even think I realized I was enjoying it. He was a dynamic lecturer and the material was so fascinating. Yeah. And then I went in and like just crushed these exams.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I knew it so well. But it really kind of began the process for me figuring out like how I learn. And over time, it, you know, with grad school, it became more refined. But really, it wasn't until I had to start teaching that I really developed my own process for how to learn. And even after that, I modified it even more for when I had to start giving more presentations in front of larger groups, or in front of groups that I felt really mattered, where I really wanted to nail it. And so I do have a process that I go through in terms of, if I need to know information, you know, what I do is I read all of the relevant literature on the topic. And from there, I highlight everything inside of what I'm reading that I think is the critical information. I'll go back after that and I'll have a PowerPoint, you know, open in front of me. And I'll literally just word for word write out everything that I highlighted into that PowerPoint, into a bunch of slides. From there, I'll actually read the PowerPoint, the word for word PowerPoint, and I'll audio record it. And then I'll listen to myself back talking through all of the highlighted information.
Yeah.
From there, I'll go back in and I will listen to a chunk, and then I'll write it in my own words in a new PowerPoint document. And like after writing all the information back out in my own words, I'll audio record myself talking through that information. And after I do that, I'll listen to that. From there, I'll actually just go back in and make a new PowerPoint that is purely just me writing it off of what I remember. Then I'll give a presentation by myself and I'll audio record that presentation. Then I'll listen to that presentation a couple of times. And then when I give the presentation, it feels like I'm not even talking, to tell you the truth. It just literally sounds like someone else is talking in my own head. And it's the easiest thing in the world. But the process to get there is very front loaded. But then people are kind of like, I've never seen a presentation where it seemed that automatic and flows that way. Like, you know, what is it? You must have a gift for presenting or something like that. And it's like, no. Like it's, if you did what I did, you'd probably receive all kinds of recognition for presentation skills as well. It's specificity. It's literally just the principle of specificity applied to another dimension of like, hey, if you want to be good at giving a presentation. Or I always said to students, like, you know, when I studied for exams, I would just go in and make my own exam for the topics that were going to be covered in the exam. That, like, you know, if I'm taking this environmental physiology class and it's the midterm, I'll make my own, what I perceive to be a midterm for that material. I'll take it, and then I'll identify the questions I got right and the questions I got wrong. And then I'll just continue to take the wrong questions until I get all of them right. And at that point, it's like I know essentially 100% of the material. And I've been training with specificity along the way of like, I'm going to take an exam. I'll listen to what the professor said is the format for the exam, multiple choice, true, false essays. And I would have already done those things. So then I go in and I take the exam, and it would always feel easier than the exam I had created for myself.
Interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting to listen to that. Those are some good strategies too. If you find that you're a learner of that way, breaking stuff down like that, that's
you know, I did a minor. My original undergrad was in history, and it was a minor in pedagogy. And so, you know, the pedagogy minor was super useful in a lot of ways. And I remember at that time, like, you know, there's Howard Gardner and like the multiple intelligences theory or hypothesis. It's really a hypothesis.
Yeah.
And it never moved beyond hypothesis, and it's been completely discredited since then. But it's stuck. It's one of those things. It's like, you know, knees not going over toes that like stuck for decades or something like that.
Yep.
You know, like,
oh, it did.
Well, where'd this come from? And same thing with that one, where it's like, you know, the kinesthetic learner, the audio learner, the visual learner, the whatever the hell learner. And there's literally no merit to this concept. None. Okay. Yes, there are different ways in which information can be presented. But the actual, like if you follow the literature after that, two things emerge from that. One is that the kind of material that you're trying to learn, there is a better way for that material. Like it's, you know, if you're teaching somebody how to shoot a basketball and you're trying to do it through, you know, having them read a book about it, that's not very effective as compared to kinesthetic learner, you know? So the information itself dictates the kind of learning style that needs to be utilized for it. But second, what shows the ability to reach mastery on a topic is that first, you should learn the material in the easiest strategy for that specific material to have conveyed to you. And then what you do is you follow it up with actually whatever is the most difficult method for that material to be conveyed to you. And if you can survive that second process and really begin to grasp it, now you'll have command of the material. So that was one of the ones that always drove me crazy with, oh, I can't learn it, I'm a hands-on learner. Well, we're talking about, you know, the Spanish Revolution, okay? What are you going to hands-on learn that? That doesn't even make sense. Like, were you going to build a diorama? Like,
yeah, no, it doesn't apply, and it doesn't apply for everything for sure. But it, I mean, greatly applies to a strength coach, and in regards to how we learn stuff and all the avenues to kind of practice something before you can really own that knowledge, because you can very quickly spot out someone who does not own the knowledge, but I mean, definitely gathered it from a book or vice versa. I think that's the easiest one to spot, is someone who's read about it, but practical application is really lacking.
No question. I mean, it was literally the other day. I just finished a set of squats, and I'm kind of like, I went over, there's a leg press next to the squat rack, and I was just leaning on it, kind of approaching death. And this guy comes over with his client to use this leg press, and first asks me if I'm using it. I'm like, no, I'm just leaning on it. And then second, asks me how to use it. This is the trainer. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're putting your client on a piece of equipment that you don't know how to use? Like, and I mean, I was kind of delirious at this point, but it was like, wow, this is it right here. This is the epitome. And this is probably someone that's charging $200 plus per hour for this person to train with them. And the person that's paying for this service is probably a very high profile individual that's very intelligent. And yet they're going to miss the fact that they're paying someone who is having them do something that they don't know how to do themselves. That's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. And I'm like, man, I'm so busy, you know, with nuance and high level stuff. And this is the other end of the reality of this industry right here.
In the same building.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing about that. God.
Is this in a gym in New York?
Yeah.
In the actual city in Manhattan? Okay. I work with some coaches up in Chicago, and they've told me the exact same scenario you just laid out. And I'll be honest with you, it's terrifying, especially coming from a strength and conditioning background where you take so much time to educate yourself and to learn and then to unlearn and relearn, regress to progress. And you have people that, again, like you're saying, probably getting paid like $200 an hour, legit, to do this.
Not probably.
True. Yeah. Okay. Not probably. Yeah. No, they are. And they don't know what they're doing. And it's kind of terrifying. In the last 10 years, it's really become this, I don't want to say Instagram age or social media age, but it's to a point where if you're good enough and you can say sexy enough words, you can get paid enough. And it's really scary, because I'm watching a lot of things happen that should not be happening on so many different levels.
I'm grateful that I had to live through it and see it, because it drove me insane. And I wanted to create something that would identify and troubleshoot every problem in like a very standardized kind of a way.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like when because things just drive me insane. And the other thing is working with clients. Like I came from working with much more athletic populations, and then you find yourself in an urban environment with rich clients. And what you realize is you just signed yourself up for a lifetime of trying to train the person that was the last pick in dodgeball. You are now training all of the kids that you went for their heads in high school. Okay. And that's kind of ironic in some ways.
Yes.
But they can't do anything. You know, sometimes I hear these things like everyone's an athlete and you can train. No. Some people have zero athletic bones in their entire body and are absolute train wreck and can't do a plank, you know, can't do anything. So like that drove me nuts. And it's kind of like, well, what is the solution? There has to be almost like a mathematical solution for any human being in some way, shape, or form to be able to do anything right. Just do one thing right today.
Yeah.
But how do I actually figure out like a pathway to be able to systematically guide me towards someone having to do something right? There has to be and that's, again, I'm very grateful for working with that population because it's kind of like coaching a sport that you've never played. Yep. I have never dealt with people that are unathletic prior to coming down here. You know, I literally kind of like walled myself off and only hung around like savages and lunatics and people that like lived and breathed for this stuff. And then I find myself working with people where, you know, exercise is number 27 on their, you know, hierarchy of importance of things to do. And like, I'm somewhere behind their dry cleaner and their fucking stable boy or something like that, you know?
Right.
And it's kind of like, oh man, like this is the worst. Like I'm in hell right now. But how do I climb my way out of this? Like, how can I build a ladder to take this person and get them to understand anything and do something right so that I can kind of send them in a direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And that I've more recently gotten to that situation more like that circumstance has come up more prevalently more recently. And I don't know if it's a societal thing happening with people because they are taking more poor care of their body along with other things. But I found starting with breathing was like the one thing I was like, at least we can do this. At least we can start to brace and coach through some of that stuff. And I don't think I put enough stock in that because it's one of those things like Joe just said, doing something, unlearning it, relearning another way. Breathing to me is definitely different now. And there's a lot of ways you can go with that too. But there's a lot more value there. I think the second go around with me, as far as giving people useful tools that you can then apply immediately. And now we have because that's the thing. It's really hard to give someone a cue that has no cues. Because I think that's kind of what's going on. You start saying stuff, even to a population you would think has some reference point, but you get someone who's never played a sport. You're speaking another language to them. So it's like, what is the universal language that we can teach to build this ladder? That is a real challenge. I've seen a lot of people like that will end them, like coaching wise, like it's over. You watch it, like they don't have another language. They can't break it down. There's no universal thing they can get to this person. So then I'm going to go up to Pat Davidson and ask him how to use the leg press. I mean, that's real time how that happens, what's going on there. But what else do you find of value with that person that you think you can start with that's like, hey, we can at least get here?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'll kind of flip it and say that I learned a lot from trainers that are absolutely clueless too. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The 100% clueless, zero exercise science education, zero actual lifting awareness or knowledge, and still being busy and being successful from a financial standpoint with clients. And some of the things that I learned from those people, because it's like, well, there has to be a common denominator. Like, is this person and other people like them? Because there's an army of them actually having so many clients. Yeah. And it's kind of like, well, okay, they are not always good looking, interestingly, although that's helpful. What they usually have is they kind of like they've got a little bit of like like some kind of charisma to them, or energy, or personality, or they've got like their clothes are kind of funky, they seem to just be someone that you wouldn't mind hanging out with.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like that's sort of what it kind of comes down to. Like they're a little bit more relaxed. They're not uptight. They're kind of fun. And that's all anybody wants in terms of spending time with another person.
Mhm.
They don't want the fucking ironclad lunatic. Nobody wants that. They want someone that's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more understanding, accepting, fun, carefree, like, cool clothes, cool haircut. That's what people want to be around. And so if you can systematically add that and adopt that to your repertoire, that goes a long way as a coach. And like, let's face it, like athletes, they're really general population for the most part.
They are. No, you nailed it. Some people wouldn't say that, but even elites, they aren't elites in the realm of training. They're
Right.
elite on the field. They're elite in their sport, but that's not what people are dealing with.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they are just as susceptible to every bit of, influence, whether that's social media or, whatever the garbage is that comes down the chute from the perspective of nutrition or supplementation or weird training stuff. They're just as susceptible to being influenced by it as the general population. And they need all the same habits that need to be built into their life as the general population. The job is the same, basically.
Yes.
It's just some people have a little bit more of a ceiling, but there's motivated gen pops, there's unmotivated gen pops.
Mhm.
There's everything in between. Same thing with athletes.
Yep.
There's some that you want to spend time with because they have a good personality and they're coachable. And there's others that are just like walking poison. And, so you're dealing with humans and trying to get humans to actually become compliant and adherent and put some effort in on a consistent basis. That's the gig.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, I'm just offering this one shoot of like, here are better exercise choices to use with someone so that they do things right. Here's a better way to look at whether or not it's done right. If it's not being done right, here are troubleshooting guidelines that you can follow that should increase the probability that you'll remove wrong and add right to the execution of this thing. Because what do you want to do? Do you want to have a bunch of reps of a garbage exercise, or do you want to build volume with actually things that are performed well? Like, obviously, you don't want to collect more piles of shit until you have a mountain of shit. You want to collect quality and have more and more quality over time. And like, I try to do that from the standpoint of like, here's a better strategy for solving for bad exercise. It doesn't necessarily solve for the personality of the coach and how much bonding there can be between coach and population that they're trying to coach. That is a whole different thing. And I'm sure that there's just as much of a science to that. But for me, I got exposed to it to a great deal from watching terrible trainers that had great businesses. Because, I had the advantage of I was a professor that trained hard with the exercise science students and athletes. So I had street cred out the ass. You know what I mean? Like, people were coming to the classes I was teaching and they were like, holy shit, like, this is the real deal. This is the really good science. And this guy is a savage. And this guy's coaching me on a very high level. None of that mattered when I got out of that bubble.
No.
None of it.
That doesn't.
Yeah. And so I'm like, man, I'm doing really poorly from a business perspective in personal training in Manhattan. Ain't nobody want to work with me. Like, what's going on with that? And it's kind of like, well, I was fairly indifferent because they were unathletic. Like, it would be like the first time that this billionaire is around somebody that is like unimpressed by them. Because I'm like, I don't really care that you have a yacht. Your squat sucks. Like, I'm kind of looking at them like, if I were you, I would immediately just run headfirst out this window. They're not used to that. They're used to something else. So the indifferent, unimpressed guy that's just kind of like, ugh, this is a waste of time, not going well from a business perspective. And like, I see these people starting to like work with other people behind my back. And I'm like, this person doesn't know their ass from their elbow, but that person's actively, attentively listening to them and has a way cooler wardrobe than I do. And I'm like, oh, okay, got it. Check. Need to step up my game in these other areas.
That's super. There's a lot of value in that. Because that's one thing Joe and I talked about a lot, especially in the military, is there are environments that are a lot more superficial than others. And you come from when you're coming from that background where it's not so much that way, and you step into one of those, you go through those infuriating moments because like this is illogical when it really comes down to what's important. But what's going to help you get to the prize faster?
It's hard to sometimes solve for what's important in different environments.
Yeah.
And, I think that's a critical thing. Like, once your mind becomes inflexible and like it doesn't understand how to modify based on new circumstances, you're really screwed, because something that could have been a beautiful solution in one realm is now absolute garbage.
Right.
You know, it's like, I don't know if you saw the New England Buffalo game in Buffalo this year, where it was like, 50-mile-an-hour winds and like snow. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But like, New England threw the ball three times. The whole game.
They won. That was great.
Yeah. And it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. Like, there's no other game in the last 40 years of NFL football where you can throw the ball three times and win. It's not a thing, but the environmental circumstances actually dictated where actually this is the right thing to do.
Right.
And they were an inferior team, as anyone could see when they got to the playoffs and had the same matchup. And it was just an absolute like axe murderer, like execution style. Buffalo just destroyed New England. So it's like the significantly inferior team from a talent perspective managed to actually win because they used a completely different tactic that was appropriate for matching with the environmental conditions in a certain realm, and the flexibility of the mindset of Belichick, who you could say, like, this guy should be inflexible from a mindset perspective. Like, of all people ever, like, he's been around for 1,000,000 years, but he still is like, hey, you know what? Like, no, like, we are not throwing the ball. Even if I want to, we're not throwing it. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So he realized what's important in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, coming from, so I've been at Westside Barbell for almost 10 years. So that is the ultra far right of strength. So like, I've been in an extreme environment for a long time. And what you said, where you're talking about going from, what you're doing, working with top end athletes, like hitting it hard every day, savagely, and then trying to work with a gen pop person. And there's like, I cannot do this as like number 27. Yeah. And this is, I've learned that too. And one of the biggest things I remember being told when I was in the NCAA was, if you can't communicate across the board, you're almost useless. Yep. So if you can't go into, like in my scenario, like into Westside and then into my facility and work with this like swimmer and diver female from OSU, like if you can't communicate across the board, it's useless. Have you seen people who get bombed because they can't communicate across the board?
That was me in the beginning, man. No. I went from training with like, world champion level strongman athletes where it's like, just a gym of fucking like spitting blood into each other's mouths or something like that. And like, I mean, like, like it was an elite training center for savages. Yeah. And that's really kind of like, I remember I had this weird concept in my head when I came down here and had to work with Gen Pops of like, I'm going to put on a news anchor face. I'm going to summon Brian Williams every time I have to talk to people. I'm going to wear a Brian Williams mask because I can't be the person that tries to communicate with these people. I forced myself to have to do that, but I was still terrible at it. It was too new. I didn't even make sense as a professor. Really didn't. Like I kind of got pushed out of that environment because it was like, man, like, yeah, you might know the material, but you you are not the right personality fit for this. Like, you know, it's almost like if you could picture like trying to put Louis into a college and like, and you know, is he going to fit with those other people? Like, not really, man.
Yeah.
Like and I'm not him, you know what I mean? I'm a 10th, a 100th of him, but even a 10th of him in that kind of environment is like,
it's too much.
Yeah. A tweed
jacket. Too much.
Yeah. You're going to bust out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. How long are your arms in comparison to the rest of your body? They're too short.
Way too short, man. Yeah. Okay. I'm like an alligator on 2 legs.
Okay. How train for strongman? How great was your fit? Wasn't it great? Like even like your overhead press wasn't.
Nah, I had terrible overhead press. I couldn't get my arms there. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
That was one of the things that really led me to try to study movement, because I probably could have been top 5 in the country / world at the 175 class if I had an overhead. You know what I mean? Because I was top 2 in the world for carries, and I was good enough in the deadlift, and my conditioning was good for medleys.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, man, I'm like finishing last in the overhead events, and then I have to win other events just to be top 10, you know? And it's kind of like, I'm just cutting myself out from under myself before I can even do anything. Cause almost always the overhead event starts the show, and it's like, oh great, I'm in 45th place. Amazing. Like, this will be fun to claw my way back from. And then it would be like event 2 would be like yoke to frame, and it was like I'd win it or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh cool, I'm back in 12th place. And it's kind of like if I just removed the one event, I would have been like 3rd or 4th in the show or something like that. And so it was so frustrating. It was like, there has to be, and it's like, you know, all I hear is, oh, you just got to stretch your lats more. And I'm like literally stretching my lats fucking 100 hours a day or something like that. And it's like, it's not working.
Okay. So you competed strongman in that class for 4 years, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, what in those 4 years, what did you try, and what did you just completely garbage away at when it comes to overhead pressing then? Because you were trying to get better at it the entire time. So like, what did you try? And like, this is not working, move on to the next thing. Do you remember any of those?
Yeah, I do. The only thing that seemed to work for me was super high volume stuff that led to hypertrophy. And then it would like actually, like, I can remember people, you know, at that time too, like the Smith machine was just a really big joke. Like, it probably still is in a lot of circles, but Zydrunas Savickas, it was funny. He put out a video of himself like, hey, this is my favorite overhead press training method.
Yeah.
And it was him just doing high incline Smith machine presses. And everybody thought he was trolling. Everybody.
Right.
And he wasn't trolling. I remember people like being like, oh, Big Z's fucking with people. And it was like, no, and he was like, no, I'm fucking serious. And then everyone was like, oh shit, like he is serious. Like, this is what this is his primary training tool for overhead press, high incline Smith machine. And it was like, wow, like that's mind blowing right now. And but I mean, like, I had to, like, I was getting my best results from similar kinds of things, like working at incline angles that I actually had for overhead pressing. And it led to some hypertrophy in the close enough tissue. And then I'd get a little bit better at some of the overhead events.
Okay. Do you think that going that moderate to lighter and like for reps overhead, just because the muscle groups are just so much smaller, it's like bombarding with a heavy ass weight just shuts everything down?
Yeah. And also it's just not enough practice. You know,
with like talking about attention, the repetition. Yeah.
I mean, really, I think, really, when you kind of get down to it, the greatest predictor of force production is still cross-sectional area. You know what I mean? Like, that is pretty undisputed. Yeah. And, you know, when you really get into like what's going to grow muscle tissue, you know, like doubles, triples, things like that, they're not as effective as compared to more traditional bodybuilding style rep ranges for higher numbers of total sets. You know, like you gotta have sufficient tension and then drive volume in a progressive overload fashion. And that's, you know, so long as you have a diet that's going to support that, that should grow the tissue that you primarily feature and stimulate.
Yeah.
So for me anyways, like the only thing that seemed to work was like, if I can get the tissues to grow, the numbers seem to go in the aftermath of that.
Okay. Were you in like a strictly like event only man, or did you cycle in barbells and dumbbells and set records with those as well?
I tried to go, well, I would train specificity, you know what I mean? For whatever show it was that I was doing, I would train the events. And then from the standpoint of building volume, I would generally stick with dumbbells, because if I train with barbells, it just led to too much joint pain.
Okay. Okay. Now, does that lack of an overhead, is that what kind of sunk you in Olympic lifting? Because I mentioned that. Yeah.
I was able to snatch as much as I could jerk.
Oh.
I just literally, it would like kind of go up and come back down. It was like a rubber band inside that thing that would just shoot it back down. And it was just embarrassing. You know what I mean? It was like, I could clean like 50 kilos more than I could jerk. And it was like, this sucks. Like if this sport was just snatch and clean, I'd be great. The jerk is the thing that's like a huge problem. But, and I'll tell you, like, it led me into some really interesting realms of movement, going into dental sciences and optometry and stuff like that. And because all of those muscles from the cranium and the facial, like the jaw and the neck, they all interact with the clavicle and the scapula and all of those supporting areas. So it's kind of like, at a certain point, you have to start looking further and further and further outside the traditional methods. And some of those things actually were more helpful for getting any kind of change in range of motion than any traditional sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And you begin to realize like how integrated the musculoskeletal system is, and all the areas that people neglect and don't pay any attention to.
Yeah. So I would take it then you're a fan of that mouthpiece that like activates the mandible.
Yeah, I mean, for the right person, it's not just like this across the board recommendation, because things get more and more individualized the more that you go north of the clavicles. You know what I mean? And that's where if you can get a team with like some kind of orthodontist or dentist that understand, like, the way I look at it, like a really good team is a physical therapist that appreciates dental and optometry integration stuff. And if you bring the person to the dentist with the physical therapist there to do all of the range of motion types testing, and then the dentist is building the mouthpiece in live time, and you're witnessing when the mouthpiece actually creates the unlocking of the range of motion, that's the mouthpiece. You know what I mean? But you kind of have to have the table there, the dentist there, the physical therapist there, so that you can see like, okay, we need to shave a little bit more off the left side. And then you shave a little bit more, and it's like, oh, boom, there goes the shoulder. It just dropped. Now it's like, it's literally just kind of an empirical method. You know what I mean? It's like, you test, you intervene, you retest, you see what works. I used to do the same thing with people that came to me that couldn't hit depth in squats or something like that, where and if they have enough money, it's like, okay, if they're not competing, like if they're competing in a sport where it's like, hey, there's competition kinds of shoes, I would go to the shoe store with people and literally have them just try on shoes and have them squat in different shoes. And at a certain point you see like, oh, you squat really well in those shoes. That's the pair of shoes you should buy. And like those things to me make a big difference. Like I'm a big setup person. Like I hate coaching people. And so things with the setup to me are always kind of like feet and grip. And even to me, like a mouthpiece, anything dental is part of the setup, and if I can set you up for success, I have to do way less in the way of cueing and coaching. And now everybody's happier. You don't have to listen to me. You can just execute like an athlete. And it's just good to go.
Yeah.
Well, we're just touching over an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have a little bit more time? One
Yeah,
more
I got about 2 minutes. I got another commitment I have to do after this. But
Okay, Joe, I know I've seen a few videos you've put out in the past. You use some interesting piece of equipment, machines. You've had access to some machines that are not commonplace. Joe always asks this, but Joe, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you had to take your favorite 3 pieces of gym equipment, one for lower body, one for pressing, one for pulling, what would they be? Has to be brand specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so I along with my business partner, like we developed something called Strength Score, which we originally used for Keiser. And, we were able to hire a software team, and they were able to extract all the data out of the Keiser equipment in live time. And so we were able to, and we were able to graph it and put it up on a screen so that we have, you can see the mechanical work that's being performed per rep, per set, per workout.
Okay.
And that way you can see whether or not range of motion is changing rep to rep, or if the person's actually able to standardize and do that. And we're able to see bar speed on a bar graph, so we can begin to see when it drops. And like, so it's, to me, like integrating, like having that superimposed on the exercise is like the most valuable thing to me from what I take away from the training. So I think for lower body training, like probably my favorite drill is the transformer bar squat with the Keiser rack on a heel wedge.
That's incredible. Okay, so that now the heel wedge could just puts them in a better position.
Yeah.
Okay.
It allows for just like vertical displacement.
Okay. And
I can measure it, and I can see that rep per rep, there's more mechanical work and greater distance per rep.
Okay.
And, from that distance is mechanical work, and distance are going to drive hypertrophy as well. So I'm probably going to, per rep, get a greater hypertrophy stimuli and signal for that work. I think that there's still something to a bar in some way, shape, or form from the perspective of loading the supporting tissues of the axial skeleton and ensuring some hypertrophy and growth of those tissues. Where, I'm so inclined to say something like a pendulum squat because of how perfect the squat is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't provide any kind, you'll probably see some loss of muscle tissue in the axial skeleton as a result of that. So I'd be more inclined to say that. From the perspective of upper body, that's a really tough one, because it's kind of like, I'm a bigger fan of pressing than I am of pulling, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
The ratios of pressing to pulling, I'm like, I don't know who came up with this. I don't think there's a whole lot of validity to it. Like, some of the best resistance trained athletes of all time have been weightlifters, and they don't do any pulling. They just Olympic lift and they squat, So I've never seen them do pull-ups. I've never seen them do rows, really. If you are going to do rows, I think a chest supported row is by far the way to go.
Okay.
The chest support provides enough of an anchor to where you're actually developing the muscles. Otherwise, you don't have enough support. You're just out in too much open space. So you're never really training the pulling muscles. You're really training more of the supporting muscles.
Okay.
So I think it's easy for me to say that a chest support is the way to go. I like, having developed the Keiser Strength Score technology, like, I'm going to want their chest supported low row, because I can measure the set, and I can see whether or not, like, my sets are actually progressively overloading more accurately.
Okay.
And then for I guess the last thing would be some kind of a push exercise. And, I like anything that can create a converging action. Because again, I don't compete in powerlifting, so I want more of like a pectoral stimuli, as opposed to a barbell is going to be less. Like, when you get convergence of the arms, dumbbells are not heavy enough for anybody that's strong. They're just if they are heavy enough, just getting them
there is a trick in itself. Yeah.
it's horrible. Like,
Yeah.
it's like it's an injury risk.
It's a lot of, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a huge problem. Like, where you can put them on your knees and roll back with gigantic dumbbells. Like, something's gonna go wrong at a certain point.
Yeah.
So I actually really like machines for pressing. Like, anything that's a converging chest press to me is just a great piece. I really like the hammer strength, like slight incline chest press. That one's real nasty.
Yeah.
If you bring the seat a little bit higher too, and it starts kind of like low, it's an incredible like strength profile or like tension profile during the exercise. You get done with that and it's like everything,
the whole pec from bottom to top,
smoked.
Absolutely.
So that's a big favorite of mine. I really like the hammer strength, just chest supported row too. That's a great piece.
Like the mid row, like upright seated, the mid row or the low row. Okay, the mid row.
Yeah,
okay.
the mid one. It's got like the two handles. It's got like the one
it comes here and goes up.
Angle. It's just a sweet angle. It kind of like sets your, when you're doing any kind of a pull, you want that scapular plane of the humerus. So it should be at a slight angle away from the body. Yeah. And that handle is exactly where
it needs to be. Yeah.
So it's like that piece of equipment has been around for 30 years or something. It's never changed. It's never changed. And it's just such a nasty mid-back row. It's incredible.
Yeah. When you do that, do you push your hips back away from it? So you lean slightly
I try to actually push my hips all the way into it.
All the way into it. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel that more in your actual like thoracic to low lat?
It's more just straight mid-back.
Mid-back for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I always try to have pelvis kind of under the thorax.
I got you. Yeah.
And you get a lot of abs on that thing, and it's like a huge stretch through those muscles.
Yeah. Rock on. Okay. And that transformer bar, what setting is it at if it's not a safety bar?
I play around with the setting because sometimes, I want it in tight so that I actively have to push it away. And that just turns like core on. But then sometimes it's like, it's almost more that my abs fatigue more before my legs. So at the other times I'll put it further away. I don't even remember the numbers. I think the 1.5 is the one where it's in tight and you got to push it away. And then the 2.5 is the one where it sits out in front of you.
Okay.
So I'll just kind of go back and forth between those two settings.
Okay. Awesome.
Pat, thank you so much. Feel free plug all your stuff that you're doing, because I know you got a lot of stuff going on, a mentorship program. You can find your trading stuff, your books. Give everybody everything and how to find you.
Yeah, I think I've got a business manager. She's great. She handles everything in terms of constructing. I think we have a website that's pretty close to being done, but not quite there yet. Where everything will be at least centralized. I've been pretty decentralized my whole career in some ways, like sort of, it probably matches my brain, it's kind of all over the place, but, it's pretty easy, like through my Instagram, Dr. Pat Davidson, Dr. Pat Davidson. Everything's in there from the perspective of the online training with Athletic Weapon, the, rethinking the big patterns, certification seminars, books, the coach's guidebook, the mass books, those are all in the link tree that you can get in that bio link. So it's pretty easy to find and solve for everything through there. It seems like social media is, I don't know, to me, it's almost easier than a website at this point.
Yeah. Right.
But,
yeah. And consolidating for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, awesome. That was great. I mean, I could easily question you for 10 hours straight. So maybe you'll privilege coming back at one date.
Yeah, we can run it back at some point in the future too. I'll be happy to do that.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
All right. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Pat.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. Have a good one, man.
Take care.
You as well. All right.